Hello, class. We've now reached chapter 11 of Zechariah, and the title of this recording is History and Future of Judah's Wicked Kings. It may be a little longer than some of the recent recordings, but won't be hopefully too long. Let's get started. Verse 1 of chapter 11. Open your doors, O Lebanon, that a fire may feed on your cedars. Wail, O cypress, for the cedar has fallen, because the glorious trees have been destroyed. Wail, O oaks of Bashan, for the impenetrable forest has come down. We see that chapter 11 opens with a poem, verses 1 through 3. It is obvious immediately that the poem is filled with symbolism. For Lebanon, the trees, and the oaks of Bashan are all addressed by the Lord. Shepherds, plants, and trees are metaphors for kings, we see in these verses. The following verses, after this, verse 4, makes it apparent that the objects mentioned are the same as the shepherds. As already mentioned in Zechariah chapter 10, verses 2 and 3, shepherd is a common way of referring to kings in the ancient Near East and the Old Testament. The lament of the poem then introduces the occasion for the lament, namely the destruction of the evil shepherds. Perhaps next in prominence to shepherd as metaphor for king is that of a plant, especially a tree. There are several Old Testament examples of this. The message of the first strophe of this poem, verses 1 and 2, let's read. I don't have to read it again, but you have it repeated from the first slide up here, these first two verses. The message of the first strophe is that it is fruitless for Lebanon to resist, for the cedar that is a king is going to be devoured in the Lord's fiery judgment. When this happens, the cypress tree, another king, will burst out in lament over the demise of the cedar. That is, the glorious trees have been destroyed. The oaks will next begin to wail, for the impenetrable forest has come down. The parallelism makes it clear in this poem that forest is synonymous with cedar. Thus, both the cypress and the oak bemoan the passing of the cedar, because it is apparent that they too stand in jeopardy. And then we look at the second strophe of this poem in verse 3. There is a sound of the shepherd's wail, for their glory is ruined. There is a sound of the young lion's roar, for the pride of the Jordan is ruined. The second strophe of this poem shifts the imagery from trees to shepherds. As previously mentioned, there's a strong link between trees and shepherds as being a metaphor for kings. There's also a wailing of the shepherds, that is kings, for their glory is ruined. The poetic form also demands that young lions is synonymous with shepherds or kings. Specifically, the poem informs us the lions, that is kings, will roar because the pride of Jordan has been devastated. Zechariah is commanded to play a role in place of the Lord. Let's look at verse number 4. Thus says the Lord my God to Zechariah, pasture the flock doomed to slaughter. Those who buy them slay them and go unpunished. And each of those who sell them says, Blessed be the Lord, for I have become rich, and their own shepherds have no pity on them. Zechariah's commission, first of all here by the Lord, it's been commissioned by the Lord, is to pasture the flock doomed to slaughter. The reason this is necessary is that the flock has been bought and sold by strangers and left unprotected by their own kings, that is, shepherds. Those who buy them and those who sell them appear to be foreign kings as their opposition to the flock's own shepherds, that is, kings, suggest. The buyers, in light of the true historical setting in the past, then slaughter them with impunity, and the sellers profit from their sale and have the gall to attribute their successful profiteering to the Lord. They say, "Blessed be the Lord, for I have become rich." Worse than the treatment Israel received from the Egyptians, Amalekites, Edomites, Amorites, Philistines, Assyrians, Babylonians, and others was the neglect of her own kings. Far from defending the nation, the kings of Israel and Judah had no pity on them. The Lord will withdraw his compassion. Look at verse 6. "For I will no longer have pity on the inhabitants of the land, declares the Lord. But behold, I will cause the men to fall, each into another's power, and to the power of his king. And they will strike the land, and I will not deliver them from their power." The Lord goes on to say that he too will no longer have pity, that is, compassion, on the inhabitants of the land. Not only had Israel's enemies bought and sold her, and her shepherd kings neglected her, but the Lord himself had run out of patience. This is not unique to Zechariah. There are other Old Testament references to the Lord's displeasure with Israel. Instead of compassion, the Lord will deliver his people to neighboring peoples and their kings, who will beat down the land of Israel with no interference from the Lord. This historically is exactly what took place in the last decades of Israel's and Judah's history, leading up to their respective captivities by the Assyrians and Babylonians, and on into the future as well. So not just the past, but it continued. Look at verse 7. "The Lord had preserved a remnant." Verse 7 reads, "So I pastured the flock doomed to slaughter," says Zechariah, "hence the afflicted of the flock. And I took for myself 2 staffs, the one I call favor, and the other I call union. So I pastured the flock." In place, he's doing as God commissioned him to do. Responding to the commission the Lord had given him, Zechariah says he pastured the flock doomed to slaughter. These are the very ones who had been bought and sold by the nations, left defenseless and unpitied by their own kings, and even delivered over by the Lord to those who did them harm. By the time the deportations had come about, there was nothing left but the most afflicted of all. This torn and tattered remnant the prophet describes as the afflicted of the flock. It was only by the Lord's grace that these survived it all. The Lord had preserved a remnant in line with his immutable covenant commitment to his people. An indispensable instrument in shepherding was the shepherd's staff. Zechariah says he took for myself 2 staffs. One he called favor, the other union. With these, the prophet says he pastured the flock. The former one, which he called favor, speaks to the relationship between the Lord and his people. And the latter one, which he called union, speaks of the relationship between Israel and Judah. With the end of the kingdom of Judah marked the end of the Lord's patience with his people. Let's read verse 8. "Then I annihilated the 3 shepherds in 1 month, for my soul was impatient with them, and their soul also was weary of me." First, the prophet Zechariah says he annihilated the 3 shepherds in 1 month, for my soul was impatient with them. Eugene Merrill states that it is clear Zechariah was reliving the Lord's own experience in Israel's history by symbolically ridding the land of 3 kings. He also indicates that the period 1 month may be a code word for a short time. If this is the case, then the rapid succession of kings at the end of Judah's pre-exilic history may be in view here. Jehoiakim, died in 597 BC. His son Jehoiachin was deported 3 months later, and his brother Zechariah was captured and blinded 11 years after that. Although these events do not cover a time span of 1 month, yet from Zechariah's viewpoint they may have appeared to be a short period of time. That means 3 shepherds or 3 kings. What favors this view despite its problems is that the end of the kingdom of Judah did indeed mark the end of the Lord's patience, and these 3 kings despise the Lord. The siege and fall of Jerusalem. Look at verse 9. Then I said, I will not pasture you. What is to die, let it die. And what is to be annihilated, let it be annihilated. And let those who are left eat one another's flesh. Cannibals. Once the shepherds had been annihilated, the Lord, through Zechariah, turned to another audience and said that he would not shepherd them, and whatever among them was destined to die of itself or to be annihilated, let it go ahead and do so. The audience addressed here is the most afflicted ones on whom the Lord himself had said he would no longer have compassion, who will die, be annihilated, and resort to cannibalism. The last gruesome judgment was predicted by Jeremiah the prophet as he anticipated the siege and fall of Jerusalem in Jeremiah chapter 19, verse 9. He then reflected on its fulfillment in the book of Lamentations. This also appears to support the conclusion that the 3 shepherds of the previous verse, verse 8, are the last 3 kings of Judah. The ruptured relationship between the Lord and his covenant people. Look at verse number 10 and 11. I took my staff favor and cut it in pieces, to break my covenant which I had made with all the peoples. So it was broken on that day, and thus the afflicted of the flock who were watching me realized that it was the word of the Lord. To dramatize the fact that the fall of Jerusalem and exile of Judah was related to the breaking of the Lord's covenant, Zechariah took the staff named Favor and broke it in 2. This was to mark the rupture of the relationship between the Lord and all the covenant peoples in their divided entities of Israel and Judah. When it came to pass, the afflicted of the flock, that is the flock destined to slaughter, knew what had happened was according to the word of the Lord that he had proclaimed through the prophets from the very beginning. It was only those who had eyes to see and ears to hear who could interpret the catastrophic events of the overthrow of Jerusalem and the temple as the fulfillment of the prophetic word. And yet even they who were obedient to the end could not escape the judgment occasioned by the apostate flock of the Lord and its evil shepherd kings. A sign of Judah's rejection of her God. Look at verse 12 and 13. I said to them, if it is good in your sight, give me my wages. But if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. Then the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, that magnificent price at which I was valued by them. So I took the 30 shekels of silver and threw them into the potter in the house of the Lord. What is viewed here is the utter rejection of the worth of the Lord and his sacrificial love through covenant history, and particularly in the closing years of the southern kingdom of Judah. That 30 shekels of silver was the amount of compensation to be paid a slave owner, were his slave to be gored to death. Jesus was betrayed by Judas for 30 shekels as well, amount in antitypical fulfillment of that here in Zechariah, as recorded by Matthew chapter 26, verse 15. It is not the preciousness of the Lord that is being evaluated here, but the worth of his service as shepherd. By the Lord's command to Zechariah, a prophet, through the shekels by which the Lord was valued to the potter. The potter in 11:13 is seen as a place of rejection. It is in disgust that the shekels are cast there. This would be a suitable place for Zechariah to throw the insulting wages as a sign of Judah's rejection of her God. Now we look at Zechariah is commanded once again to take the equipment of a foolish shepherd. Then I cut in pieces my second staff union to break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. The Lord said to me, take again for yourself the equipment of a foolish shepherd. Zechariah then cut in pieces the second staff union. This staff denotes the union of the two nations, Judah and Israel, into one people of God. The cutting of the staff means the unbinding of the union, the rupture of the brotherhood of the two kingdoms. This was a historical fact since the time of the division under Jeroboam and Rehoboam and the exile of Israel and then of Judah. This historical breach awaits the eschatological day for its healing. The only hope is for a shepherd who will come and in tender love and omnipotent power effect a restoration. Such a one will come, but not until the sinful rebellion of God's covenant people runs its course. Before they can accept the good shepherd to come, they must have one last fling with a ruler who will utterly disappoint them. Thus the Lord tells Zechariah once again to take the equipment of a foolish shepherd. Here we see a shift in orientation from historical to eschatological. Verse 16 says, for behold, I am going to raise up a shepherd in the land who will not care for the perishing, seek the scattered, heal the broken, or sustain the one standing, but will devour the flesh of the fat sheep and tear off their hoofs. Beginning with verse 15, there can be no doubt that the orientation has shifted from the historical pre-exilic times to a future eschatological time. It is best to see in the shepherd the whole collective leadership of Israel from Zechariah's time forward. This leadership will culminate in the last times in that epitome of godless despotism, the individual identified in the New Testament as the Antichrist. The shepherd in the land locates the rule of the shepherd as being in the Holy Land. This shepherd will not care for the perishing, seek the scattered, heal the broken, or sustain the one standing. This foolish shepherd will stop nourishing the flock. Indeed, he will devour the flesh of the fat sheep to satisfy his own appetite. The Lord will judge the worthless shepherd. Verse 17 reads, woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock. A sword will be on his arm and on his right eye. His arm will be totally withered, and his right eye will be blind. The Lord describes this shepherd as a worthless one because he leaves the flock. The woe judgment that comes upon him will be a sword that wounds his arm and right eye. Without the arm to retrieve and carry the sheep, and the eye with which to search and find, the shepherd truly is worthless. So serious will be wounding be that the arm will be completely withered away and the eye will become sightless. He is so incapacitated that he can no longer continue as a shepherd. The point is that those who rule over the people of the Lord and who abuse that privilege can expect the awesome judgment of God that results in their disposition and replacement by shepherds who more lovingly and faithfully discharge their responsibility. And that